stuff you should know before you go to an engine machine shop. All right, so you're obviously watching this video because you're thinking about rebuilding an engine, or you are rebuilding an engine. Now, as far as the engine is concerned, it honestly doesn't matter. This will all apply for rebuilding an engine in general. Now, at the point where you are now, whether or not you're just starting the process or you're into the process, is you have to figure out your first thing. You have to figure out how much work you're going to do and how much work the engine machine shop is going to do. Now, also something, I said this in an earlier video, you want to pick, if possible, a machine shop that kind of tailors towards your engine, if that's possible. There's lots of very good general machine shops that can do all kinds of stuff. We work on all kinds of engines. We do specialize in diesel stuff, commonly B-Series Cummins, which come in the Dodge pickup trucks. Okay, now a lot of the work we get, 80 to 90% of the stuff that comes in the door is all B-Series Cummins. Reason is, we specialize in it. Now, that is not to say that we don't work on, we work on Porsches, we work on Hondas, we work on Chevys, we work on Fords. You know, we get some, we've even had some Lamborghini stuff. I've done some Ferrari work. You know, we get all kinds of different stuff, but primarily we work on B-Series Cummins. Now, if the machine shop that you're going to is the only machine shop around, then, well, you kind of have to deal with what you have. And you're maybe, I'm not going to say are going to get subpar work, because that's the wrong thing to say, is they aren't going to know the little tiny things there is to know about every single engine. It's just not possible. Pretty much every shop is going to have their own little niche, something they specialize in, from what I have found anyway. And if they don't, that's fine too. Maybe they're just a general machine shop and doing everything. But I've found, for the most part, you will get lots, you know, most shops will have some sort of a niche. Now, if you live in a very highly populated area and there's a bunch of machine shops, I personally would call around to all of the different machine shops and see who is tailored better for the engine that you're building. Okay, now we're through that. If you're trying to figure out, hey, am I going to rebuild this engine, being me being the customer, or am I going to have them rebuild it? Now, if they're rebuilding it, you're going to want to call them. Obviously, you're going to get a quote or whatever it may be, an estimate, I guess, not a quote, an estimate. And so anyways, all right, so you're going to call and get an estimate if you're having them completely rebuild the engine. Now, that estimate is only going to be to the best of their ability without looking at the engine. So if they tear the engine apart and there's more stuff wrong with it or something that you didn't know was wrong with it, your quote is going to be different than your estimate, okay? Now, if you are going to disassemble and assemble the engine yourself, then it's kind of it's a bit different. There again, you still need to talk to the machine shop when you're doing it and ask them, what do I need to take off? What do I need to bring? That type of stuff. Now, I'm going to talk about a Cummins just because it's very simple. They're very simple engines, very simple setups. Somebody brings us a Cummins and they're going to assemble themselves, but we were gonna, you know, we're rebuilding the head, boring a hole in the block, polish the crankshaft, check the rods, polish the camshaft, you know, whatever you may be doing, you need to know certain things, okay? So on the cylinder head, on any Cummins engine, any pushrod engine for that matter, you're gonna want the valve train off, and then you're also gonna want, so your valves and springs and all that stuff are gonna stay in there. But you know, your rockers, any studs, any bolts, brackets, any of that type of stuff you want to strip, sensors, all of that you want to be stripped out. You don't take that stuff to the machine shop. That is something that I've heard lots of times. Well, the machine shop's not going to give it back to you. It is possible that you're not going to get it back because the machine shop, if they only have one cylinder head they're working on, pretty good chance they're not going to be in business very long. It's really hard to keep track of that stuff when you have 50, 60, 70 cylinder heads floating around. I do my best, but you know, sometimes stuff happens. So I recommend to make sure all that stuff is stripped off before you send it in. The machine shop doesn't want lifting brackets. The machine shop doesn't want any plugs, sensors, brackets, any of that stuff for that. Now, if it's an overhead cam engine, Sometimes they're going to want the cam and the lifter buckets and all that stuff for setting valve lash, but just ask them about that. Otherwise, all that stuff you want to strip out. The less the machine shop has to keep track of and the less that they have to do, cheaper the bill is going to be. Now on the block side of things, if you're setting the crankshaft, obviously you're going to have to send the crankshaft. You want to take balancers, flex plates, flywheels, any of that stuff. They don't need any of the bolts. They're not going to need on it unless you want it balanced. Now, if you want the assembly balanced, you are going to have to bring them, depending on the engine, but we'll just go in general. They're going to need the flex plate, flywheel, the bolts that hold it on, and then also the harmonic balancer and bolts hold it on. And if there's any gear train stuff that is sandwiched by the harmonic balancer, you're going to need that as well, because it all needs to be sandwiched together so you can get a proper balance on the crankshaft. Camshaft, you just need the camshaft. If the gear is just bolt on, they won't need the gear. You can just bring the camshaft. Now, most of the time, most engines you're going to be replacing the camshaft. They aren't going to need that, except if you're having them put cam bearings in. So on a Cummins, there's 1 or 2 cam bearings, unless it's aftermarket. You want to be able to, like, the machine shop should be asking you for the camshaft to fit the camshaft into the bearings when they've put new bearings. So if you know the camshaft that you're going to use, bring the new camshaft. And if you're supplying bearings, obviously you're going to bring the bearings, but bring the camshaft so that they can try the camshaft in the cam bearings. That is something it is, I have to have the camshaft. I will not put cam bearings in without the camshaft because if you have a tight spot, you aren't going to be able to fix it without the proper tools. And if it's the engine's half together, when you realize it doesn't fit properly, that's also a major problem because now you're going to have to strip it apart because you have to remove material from the bearing to make it fit properly. So problem. Then on the block side of things, there again, no brackets, no bolts, unless you need to have the front cover bolted on. Some engines need the front cover because it gets machined down with the deck surface. Then you'll need a couple bolts in that, but you don't need brackets, sensors, bolts, any of that stuff that doesn't need to be there. Do not leave it in there because 1, you're not going to get the engine as clean. 2, and they have to deal with all the bolts and brackets and all that stuff to keep track of. And there again, you have 40 or 50 engines on the go. It is really hard to keep track of all that stuff, especially when you have multiples of the same engine. It makes it even harder. There again, I do my best to try to not mix that stuff up or lose it or whatever, but stuff does happen sometimes. If I was perfect, I wouldn't be standing in front of this camera, would I? Anyways, and then on the last part on the block, you are going to want to bring them the main caps and main bolts or the main bed plate, whatever type, the engine. Some are just individual caps, some are a bed plate, just depending on what it is. But you want to bring them that and the bolts because, well, 2 reasons. One is they're going to have to hold it into 1 or 2 of the machines with that main setup. And then also you're going to want them to check the main bores to make sure the main bores are round. So, but this is questions you want to ask the machine shop, physically call them and say, hey, I bring in the engine, what do you want, what don't you want? Now, most of the time they're just going to tell you, you're good to go. And then on the rod side of things, you really should be checking your rods as well. Make sure the big end is round, and then if it has a pin bushing on the top side, you make sure it's the right size, replace it, or make sure it's within spec. Lots of times on a B-Series Cummins, they will be in spec. But if they're not, then they're not, then you replace them. Now, that being said, not every machine shop is going to have the tools for doing all of that stuff. But there again, you ask the machine shop, they'll tell you what they have, what they can do, and what they can't do. Pretty simple. And also too, another thing, if you can, like when you're bringing a head, at least make sure there isn't pools of oil pouring out of it. You flip it over and there's oil pouring out all over the place. Flip it over, you can clean up a little bit. Like if you're ripping the engine apart, you've already made a mess. Try to get it semi clean. I'm not talking it has to be perfectly clean, but semi clean is nice. When guys bring stuff that's, you can tell they've made an effort, at least flipped it upside down, let the oil drain out of it, that type of stuff. It makes it easier for us. And then we're not making a huge mess in the shop because if we make a mess in the shop because of, that head poured oil all over the place, well, if I spend half an hour cleaning it up, then I'm charging you half an hour for cleaning it up. It is what it is. Also, another thing is you want to ask them if there is any plugs or anything like that they're going to be removing and not putting back in if you're doing the final assembly. And if they are, you're going to want to know which plugs they are, if they can supply you with the plugs, that type of thing. Just something to ask a question about anyway. Okay, so on the machining side of things, if you are supplying parts or if they're supplying parts, there's probably going to be some questions. If you're bringing a block, they're going to want the pistons to be able to measure the pistons versus the bore size. Good practice to make sure that you know exactly what size the pistons are, because not all pistons are the same size. Learned that the hard way over the years. A lot of companies now are very, very good at that. They'll match up pistons, but just because it's 20 over doesn't mean it's going to be exactly 20 over. Just is what it is. So make sure you're bringing pistons. If it's being bored oversized and you're bringing the pistons, for me, how I do it is we'll rough bore the block, and then I'll tell you, hey, it needs 20 over, it needs 30 over, it needs 40 over, it needs 60 over, whatever it may be, or it potentially could be in millimeters. But just depending on whatever it needs. Now, on the cylinder head side of things, if you're bringing parts there again, if you want the head rebuilt, just bring everything. Bring every part that they are going to need to rebuild the head. Then they're not waiting, because that's something that takes up a lot of time and will cost you more money. If you bring parts, and let's say you bring all the parts except for valve guides, and the valve guides are worn out, now the guy's got it on the machine, he's tooled it up, got stuff set out and ready, and now he's got to take it back off again, wait for you to get the right parts, and then put it back on again. There's going to be a charge for that. So just make sure that you're getting stuff set up properly. Know what you need before you take it to the machine shop, because I've had lots of people, they bring stuff in and they don't have what they need. They don't have what I need. They don't have what they need. Just turns into a kerfuffle. And obviously don't want that. I don't know if there's anything else that I can think of right at the moment. But like I said, consult with the machine shop that you're dealing with. Actually, something I was kind of thinking that I should do is maybe like a worksheet or a checklist for guys, and then I'll just I guess I could put it just in the link in the description. You can click on it and be able to print it off. Something like that. That'd be kind of cool. I think maybe help some guys out. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in. If it is, hit me up in the comments. And if there's enough guides, I will make one and I will put it in the description as a link to be able to print it off, a PDF link to be able to print it off.